True Crime Fest Northwest is just a few weeks away, and you can get your tickets now at truecrimefestnorthwest.com. What can you expect from the inaugural event? On Friday, August 30th, attendees can check out the expo hall before enjoying a kickoff presentation and self-defense training from Rose City Self-Defense. On Saturday, you'll have another chance to get swag from your favorite podcasters and true crime creators in the expo hall. Presentations on Saturday include, but are not limited to, Desiree Young, who is Kyron Horman's mother, United Justice Group, which is family members of victims of accused serial killer Jesse Calhoun, our friends Sisters in Survival, aka Tiffany Edens and Danielle Tudor, the National Center for Victims of Crime, authors Lindsay Wade and Rebecca Morris, and some of your favorite podcasts like P&W Haunts and Homicides, A Hateful Homicide, Somewhere in the Pines, Snake River Killer, and of course, Murder in the Rain, among others. And those are just some of the scheduled appearances. Saturday night will also be the time for the VIP party. Sunday, the festivities continue with presentations, a drag bingo raffle fundraiser, and a VIP brunch. So get to truecrimefestnorthwest.com, use code RAIN10 for 10% off, and get your tickets today. And vendors, there's still time to sign up for a table. Visit truecrimefestnorthwest.com and get your tickets now. True Crime Fest Northwest, True Crime Fest Northwest, True Crime Fest Northwest, True Crime Fest Northwest.
As I've gotten older, it's become more and more important to me that I support my immune system and digestion. I'm always looking for a supplement that's not only good for my body, but tastes good too. That's where Equilibria Daily Nutri-Greens comes in. Equilibria is a woman-owned wellness brand with unique science-backed products that help bring your mind and body back into harmony. Daily Nutri-Greens contain an immune antioxidant and detox blend, along with prebiotics, probiotics, and over 35 fruits and vegetables. These greens are great because they're the quickest way to fill in your daily nutritional gaps, and it tastes good. Equilibria makes it easy to meet your nutritional goals. You can subscribe so you don't have to worry about running out, and you get 25% off each month. Head to myeq.com and use code RAIN for 15% off Equilibria's Daily Nutri-Greens and much more. That's myeq.com and use code RAIN at checkout for 15% off site-wide today. I think all of us can agree that getting older means changes are in store. While I may look like I'm in my 20s, you guys know the truth and my body is changing, and I'm always learning what it wants. Whether you're in your early 20s and experiencing changes in your menstrual cycle, or your age is a little bit higher and you're nearing perimenopause or menopause, we should be talking about it. There shouldn't be any shame in looking for ways to support our body through changes and help ourselves through difficult times. Happy Mammoth, the company that created Hormone Harmony, is dedicated to making women's lives easier, and that means using only science-backed ingredients that have been proven to work for women. They make no compromise when it comes to quality, and it shows. Hormone Harmony isn't just for menopause. Any woman with symptoms of hormonal imbalances can take it. It's perfect for symptoms that put a woman's life on hold. Things like hot flashes and night sweats, racing thoughts and low moods, poor sleep and feeling tired all the time, and occasional bloating and gas. And the biggest benefit, women say feeling like myself again. That's what women mention over and over in Hormone Harmony reviews. For a limited time, you can get 15% off your entire first order at happymammoth.com just by using the code RAIN at checkout. That's happymammoth.com and use the code RAIN for 15% off today.
This is Murder in the Rain, where each week Emily Rowney, Alicia Holland, and Josh McCullough tell true crime stories of the Pacific Northwest. Murder in the Rain contains graphic content. Listener discretion is advised.
We've said it before, and we'll probably say it again. Sometimes when we're looking into a case, we find another. Whether it was investigated by the same detective, tried by the same judge, separate crimes committed by distant relatives, or maybe people just happened to cross paths. But it happens all the time. As I began working on a case for this episode, I stumbled onto other cases, which usually results in a giant episode. But this time I decided to break it into two parts and possibly other future episodes. Today we'll explore two unique cases where perpetrators took to the internet to bare their souls and how the cases relate. A vigilante killer in Washington state who was so floored by a devastating case out of northern Idaho that he took it upon himself to do the public a service and take justice into his own hands. Then we'll dive into that northern Idaho case that left the nation holding their breath to see what happened next. On Saturday, August 27, 2005, a 911 call was placed to the Bellingham, Washington Sheriff's Office at 3:08 a.m. The caller, 42-year-old James Russell, had come home from work to find his roommates dead. Officers made their way to the small one-story home on Northwest Avenue to find James's roommate, 49-year-old Hank Isis, on the floor of his bedroom with a pool of blood beneath his head. Not far from Hank, in the same room, was the body of his other roommate, 68-year-old Victor Vasquez. Victor's body lay near a computer that appeared to have been used not long before their deaths. Hank Isis had died due to a single gunshot wound to his head, entering near his right ear and exiting out his left cheek. Victor Vasquez also died due to a single gunshot wound that entered point blank at his right temple and exited through his left eye. As investigators searched the room, they located two spent bullet casings near the bodies, each coming from a 9mm gun. The computer, which was on and had been recently used, had browsers open to the Whatcom County sex offender website. The pages were open to 3 Level 3 sex offenders in the area, 2 of which were laying dead in that very room: Victor Vasquez and Hank Isis. Hank Isis, who was originally born in Holland in March of 1956, went to prison in 1997 after raping a 13-year-old boy. At the age of 41 years old, Isis had been arrested on 4 counts of rape after assaulting the boy multiple times over the course of several weeks near his home just on the Canadian border. He had been feeding the boy drugs and alcohol to make him compliant. He served 5 of the 5.5 years he was sentenced to and underwent sex offender treatment. Upon release, he registered as a Level 3 sex offender in Whatcom County, and with help from his friends at the American Reformed Church, he purchased the home on Northwest Avenue. In order to ensure his mortgage was paid, he opted to have roommates. Victor Vasquez was originally from New York City and moved to the West Coast with his family. In the late 1980s, allegations surfaced that he had been sexually abusing his own sons and daughters for the duration of their childhood, specifically from infancy to the early 90s when they were in their mid-teens. He went to prison in 1991 after pleading guilty to repeatedly molesting his children. He was released in 2002 after spending 11 years in prison. Vasquez met Isis in treatment, and once he was released, he made plans to move into Isis's home and registered as a Level 3 sex offender in Whatcom County, as is required by the law. As a reminder, the level of sex offenders in Washington state, like Oregon, relates to risk, 1 being the lowest risk to reoffend and 3 being the highest risk to reoffend. Those deemed Level 3 are typically violent or repeat offenders. The public is notified when a Level 2 or 3 offender moves into a neighborhood. Washington was the first state to authorize registration and public notification regarding sex offenders in 1990 as part of the Community Protection Act.
Oh, that's cool.
Currently, it's required that, quote, the county sheriff is notified within 72 hours of the offender settling in. Within each community, the notification type might vary. It could be by direct notification, such as official mail, or it could be a passive notification where it's posted on the Washington Sex Offender Public Registry. Some neighborhoods have meetings where they regularly disclose the information from those public registries to the neighbors. Washington requires Level 3 sex offenders to register on the sex offender list for 10 years, 15 years, indefinitely, or for life. This all depends on their criminal history and the requirements set at their release. Because the public is notified and housing is limited to sex offenders, it's not surprising that multiple level 3 offenders would end up living in the same home. The fact that ISIS owned his home made it much easier for his friends to find a place to live once they were released, and he could ensure that he paid his mortgage on time because he always had help with it.
It's not a horrible setup. It's like if they've done their time and they're going to these meetings and they meet people that they can affiliate with to maybe if they're working on things to be better.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
And it makes it easier on parole officers having, they could maybe just go to one area. Also limits how spread out they are over the town.
Yeah, or just someone feeling whether or not they have worked on it or are past it, but someone feeling like they have to lie to get a place, and then that could become a thing, and that could really escalate if someone found that out. And
I believe there are several counties in Washington that I think have designated areas because you can't be by churches, you can't be by schools.
Right.
You have like curfews and things. So there are a lot of limitations, and it makes it easier when they can live by their work too.
Right. I mean, for how horrible that is, if they're all working on stuff, that's a good situation.
It is also risky because when you're with people that are like-minded, you have a chance of falling into a hole.
A real hotbed of
exactly.
Right. It's like addicts being together, like
chatting about things.
If one person kind of goes there,
I agree. I do think it's helpful. Russell was religious and dedicated to his recovery, so that was probably a better situation for those two guys. But the story will tell. ISIS's neighborhood was aware of their statuses and were notified in a community meeting when they moved in. Most people thought the men kept to themselves and they didn't really have any complaints as they were quiet and kept their yard neat. I mean, that's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they had an HOA. As I mentioned, Hank Isis owned the little house where his and Victor Vasquez's bodies were found. He had been renting the room to Victor for 3 years. Eventually, James Russell, the man that discovered their bodies, had moved in and rented the third room. Russell had also served time in prison for sex assault and was a level 3 sex offender. He was convicted for the sexual abuse of a 3-year-old girl. She wasn't his only victim. He had at least 6 other victims who were either an infant or toddler at the time of their abuse.
Oof. That's a bad guy.
When police questioned Russell about his roommates' deaths, they learned that he had much more information than he alluded to on his 911 call. Russell said at around 7 p.m. Friday night, roughly 8 hours before he discovered the roommates' bodies, an FBI agent came to the door wanting to speak to them. The man was wearing a blue jumpsuit and a baseball cap with the FBI logo. Obviously an FBI agent.
Yes, of course.
A jumpsuit?
A jumpsuit.
Like one of the Mario Brothers?
I picture like painting coveralls, like
Yeah.
a navy blue like my dad wears to work.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Federally issued.
Federally issued. Maybe a stripe on the side? I don't know.
Wow.
Russell explained that the FBI agent told him he was investigating an internet posting of a hit list of registered level 3 sex offenders. The man said 2 offenders had already been killed and their deaths were being investigated as a hate crime. The reason he was at the door was that he was investigating the rest of the list to ensure the safety of those named. The household occupants, Russell, Vasquez, and Isis, were all listed. The FBI agent knew who they were and that they were registered level 3 sex offenders. Russell invited the agent in and all of the men began talking. At one point during the encounter, the agent asked Russell for beer, which he didn't have in the house because he didn't drink. The man then made a call on his cell phone, and shortly thereafter, a woman driving a van picked him up. He returned not long after with a half rack of Coors. Once back, the 4 men sat on the front lawn in lawn chairs talking while the man drank his beer.
And they weren't alarmed that an FBI agent on duty was drinking?
Well, I wonder if they thought maybe he wasn't on duty because he came in the evening. It's around 7 p.m. Maybe he's off work and he's shooting the shit,
but he has
telling
his
him he wants to
jumpsuit.
protect him. He has his FBI issued hat. So, I mean, who are they to question it, right? Like they're used to being checked on.
I was going to say, and if you're already in legal trouble, you probably don't.
You don't want to risk
yeah.
it. The conversation turned into more of an interview. The man inquired about their cases and what led up to them becoming level 3 offenders. He asked them to detail the offenses they committed. He then promised them he would protect them from the vigilante killer. Some sources stating that he assured them he could have their sex offender statuses lowered, making it harder to locate them on a computer. Russell had a work shift at 10 p.m., so he left slightly earlier to go to the bank before heading to his shift. As he got to the bank, he realized he forgot his wallet, so at around 9:30 p.m., he returned home. The men were no longer in the yard, but when he went inside to get his wallet, the FBI agent was in the house. The last words the FBI agent spoke to him were, quote, "Don't leave your wallet here again." Super cryptic. And before Russell could really process what the man had said, he was out the door and on his way back to work.
Did you say that? Did he show credentials?
I don't remember catching that. I don't think he did.
Just flipped his wallet open real quick.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, he had the hat.
If you go to an Army surplus store or something,
Mhm.
they
You
have
can-
all sorts
yeah.
of badges.
Yeah,
And jumpsuits.
that's true.
2 for $50.
Russell tried calling home around 1 a.m. to speak to Vasquez, but no one answered. According to him, he would often call during his late shift and the two men would speak. He called back just before 3 a.m. and still no answer. He came home at 3 a.m. for his lunch break to find that the side door of the house was wide open. That's when he went inside and discovered the bodies and called police. After hearing about this very odd encounter, police had Russell point out anything in the house that the man had touched. They ended up collecting a lawn chair, a Coors can, and several cigarette butts. I think this indicates that they were like, this isn't true.
Mm.
These two sex offenders weren't murdered. There isn't an FBI agent checking in on you. They also canvassed the neighborhood for people who may have witnessed the man and discovered at least one witness did. They too described the blue outfit and FBI hat, and they mentioned that the man was at least 6 feet tall and had a very loud voice. Now, that's because they could hear them all talking in the yard. That same neighbor heard what could have been gunshots between 9:10 and 9:30 p.m. Shortly after, curious to what that sound was, he peeked outside and saw a white van leaving the neighborhood. The investigators also tracked down the local convenience store where the man had purchased the Coors beer. The clerk remembered him and described him similarly to how the other witnesses described him. She said he paid for the beer in cash between 7:40 and 8 p.m. Police worked diligently to learn as much as they could and hopefully track down a lead. Thanks to the collection of the Coors can, they were able to get a full DNA profile of their suspect, as well as a full left thumbprint. Though they didn't have anyone already in the system, once they had a suspect, they'd easily be able to make a match or narrow down suspects. They were also able to narrow down the weapon thanks to the 9mm shell casings found at the scene. They believed they were fired from a 9mm Smith & Wesson semi-automatic. A couple of days into their investigation, someone from the media reached out to police to let them know they had received a letter with someone claiming to have committed the murders. The writer claimed that the reason he committed the crime was that the victims were level 3 offenders and needed to be taught a lesson. The writer noted that they weren't going to stop killing level 3 sex offenders anytime soon because they wanted all offenders to be shaking in their boots, wondering who would be the next to be killed. Before they could really investigate where the letter came from, someone reached out to police and claimed to be the sender. At around 7 p.m. Monday, September 5th, roughly 9 days after the murder, a man named Michael A. Mullen called police to turn himself in for the murders of Hank Isis and Victor Vasquez. They obviously invited him in for an interview to understand if he truly was the person that committed this crime. 36-year-old Michael Anthony Mullen was a complicated man. Standing 6'5" and weighing around 300 pounds, his appearance often conflicted with how folks described him. A sensitive person who was doing his best despite a life of adversity. He was one of 4 children, and though the signs were there, it would be years before he ever confided in anyone that he had been a victim of molestation, an act inflicted upon him by one of his neighbors that went unreported and yet molded his entire life. By the 8th grade, Mullen dropped out of school and embarked on a life of addiction, starting with alcohol. He was a bedwetter for many, many years. As a teen, he met someone who helped him get into the Job Corps. The man convinced him to travel to Florida with him. Unfortunately, he was abandoned there, and some of his family believed the man victimized and traumatized him further on that trip. He tried to form a normal life and eventually married twice and had 2 children. In 1993, he was convicted after he passed a bad check for 150 pounds of veal in Everett, Washington. What a scam.
That's specific.
I think maybe he rolled with the restaurant crowd. I don't know.
Wow.
This would lead him down a road of becoming a self-described con man.
Always starts with veal, the gateway meat.
In 1997, he was convicted again for a similar scam. Eventually, his addiction grew to incorporate prescription drugs like Xanax and sleeping pills. In 2003, he was convicted of vehicle theft. After multiple stints in prison, his brother Larry said prison had made things worse for Michael. That is not surprising, but he wasn't getting treatment, he wasn't getting rehabilitated, and he was spending time with the people like the ones that took advantage of him as a child. After speaking to Mullen on the phone, police were happy to bring him in and see what he knew about the 2 vigilante killings. Within a few moments of their interview, it became apparent he knew a lot. Michael Mullen provided police with so much detail that they were sure he was the vigilante killer. He told police that he had been aware of the household of level 3 offenders since mid-July and had been planning their murder for weeks. He regularly used the sex offender community notification website in order to familiarize himself with the level 3 sex offenders in the area. Mullen stole a gun from a friend and wound up at the front door of the Northwest house that August evening. He claimed his goal was to see if the men would confirm their identities, open up to him about their crimes, and ultimately show remorse for what they had done. He believed they hadn't. He even told his brother that Vasquez and Isis appeared to brag to him about their crimes against children. He went on to tell police that he had killed both men with a single gunshot wound to the head using a 9mm Smith & Wesson gun. He later dumped the gun in the Puget Sound off Orcas Island. The story Mullen told aligned perfectly with the stories both the evidence and Russell told. Mullen even asked police if they found a fingerprint on the Coors can and whether or not they could find one on the bullet casings because he had rubbed them down with gun oil. He even detailed that he had brought gloves but forgot to put them on, so he was aware he left fingerprints behind.
Oh, halfway there.
Before long, DNA testing and fingerprinting would prove that he was in fact the killer he claimed to be. As police dug further into Mullen's background and the case at hand, they soon discovered Mullen had been making his imprint on the internet. Just days prior to the murders, he had posted on a weblog called The Dark Side. In his post, he said the following: "I am Agent Life, and I alone am responsible for the deaths of the 2 level 3 pedophiles in Bellingham, Washington, and they are not the last to be executed unless things change for the better." He signed this post with his full name, Michael A. Mullen.
Wow.
In other posts tied to his AOL user account, he mentioned one of his hobbies was hunting pedophiles. Some might find it odd that Mullen didn't also kill James Russell. Russell did not appear to be one of the level 3 sex offenders pulled up on the screen on the home computer. However, Mullen was aware of his status when he showed up at the home. Mullen told police that he let Russell leave with his life because he was the only one who appeared to show remorse for his actions. He told the police, quote, "I interviewed all 3 occupants, and out of the 3, only one showed remorse or guilt. He is the one I let go. The other 2," he went on to say, quote, "blamed their victims and showed no remorse." He wanted Russell to be left alive so that he could, quote, "spread the message that we will not tolerate our children being used and abused." Mullen didn't believe that he was some kind of savior. He knew he wasn't perfect and that he wasn't a saint, but he didn't want other children to grow up the way he did, confused, sad, and scared. In their interview with Mullen, police learned that he had been renting rooms and staying with a friend while in the area. After some investigation, they were able to track down a woman that he had been staying with most recently. It just so happened she was an unknowing accomplice to the crime. Once they had a chance to speak with her, they confirmed that she was the driver of the van at least one witness had seen at the Northwest residence on August 26th. She thought she had been driving Mullen to a rental property he was considering. She dropped him off and picked him up several times that day, assuming she was being a good friend and helping him find a new place on his own. After further discussion, They learned that she was aware she was missing a handgun. She kept a 9mm Smith & Wesson in a lockbox in her home. She went to look at it one day and saw that it had been swapped out with a BB gun. She didn't know what happened, but after the interview realized that her friend Mullen had been the one to swap it out. The woman's car was searched as evidence, and police found a Coors can inside as well as a blood smear on the passenger side interior molding. Michael Mullen was held on $1 million bail in the Whatcom County Jail after turning himself into police. He initially pleaded innocent, but eventually accepted a plea deal. The deal required him to plead guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. In return, he would receive 44 years in prison versus the death penalty conviction that he qualified for at the time. Mullen wouldn't fulfill his entire sentence. In fact, he barely served his sentence before he died behind bars. On April 15, 2007, a mere 20 months after he committed the murders, Mullen was found unresponsive in his cell. His official death record noted that he died from pneumonia, but the manner of death was undetermined due to, quote, acute mild drug toxicity. He had overdosed on prescription drugs that he had likely been saving up and stashing. While the Stafford Creek Corrections Center, where he was incarcerated, wouldn't outwardly confirm this, the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Department believed Mullen had taken his own life as they discovered writings in his cell that were consistent with suicide. Looking back at this case, it was apparent Mullen always planned to die. Before being sentenced to 44 years, he had come to terms with the possibility of the death penalty taking his life. In fact, he somewhat welcomed it. He told authorities that the true reason he committed his vigilante killings against 2 level 3 sex offenders was inspired by a high-profile 2005 case that happened earlier that year. A level 3 sex offender who should have never been out on the streets went on to ruin the lives of multiple families in multiple states. Not only did Mullen want to send a message to other registered Washington sex offenders that their abuse of children wouldn't be tolerated, he wanted to die first so that he could wait in the afterlife to punish that specific sex offender when he finally arrived to meet him.
Whoa. That's hardcore.
I know.
Well, I think his actions really speak to the intense victimization that he went through.
Yeah, and not to mention being locked up with people probably talking about similar crimes.
That changes how you see things. And so his lens of, yep, this is better to do it this way.
What's interesting is people were divided on him. As you can imagine, a lot of people thought he was doing the Lord's work. They were like, yeah, keep doing it. And he told police when they caught him, oh, well, somebody else is going to continue doing this. Now that I've started it, the ball's going to keep rolling.
Right. Well, and you can't blame him because you look at our justice system so often. It's like, how often do we cover these cases where someone is let out or someone has done really horrific things and the punishment doesn't really fit the crime?
And we're going to talk about that next
Oh,
because
boy.
we're going to dive into that case that inspired him to murder.
Oh, boy.
Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is the most populated city in North Idaho with just over 54,000 residents. It sits 39 miles east of Spokane, Washington, putting it just a few miles east of the Washington-Idaho border and roughly 90 miles directly south from the Canadian border. The city, which is a French pronunciation, was initially recorded by the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1805. The city is named after the Coeur d'Alene people, a federally recognized Idaho tribe that has inhabited the area for thousands of years. The area sits on the north side of a body of water called Lake Coeur d'Alene, which is a natural dam-controlled lake. The lake was created due to the floods towards the end of the Ice Age melt. I don't know if you knew that or not.
That's a fun fact.
It is a fun fact. And another fun fact, this area is a renowned Pacific Northwest staple for water sports, fishing, and camping. Have either of you been there?
Don't think I have.
I haven't either, but
Nor have I.
I know someone whose family, I think, had a house there, so they would go there a lot. But I was finally looking at a map and it is a really cool area. The lake is...
I like Idaho. It's very fun.
Tourism creates jobs and is vital to our economy. We have a wonderful backyard, so gather your family and friends and begin your Idaho adventure today.
Get your free travel guide at visitidaho.org.
Coeur d'Alene also sits on top of the Interstate 90. And yet another fun fact, there are 70 interstate highways in the United States, and I'm willing to bet all of them have at least one frontage road. In the event you didn't know, because I feel like I passively knew this, I don't actually remember learning this, but a frontage road is a road that runs parallel to the interstate. It's often a service road, an access road, or a feeder road. Along the I-90, just east of Lake Coeur d'Alene, is a neighborhood called Wolf Lodge, and that's where you'll find a 1-mile stretch of road called Frontage Road. Travelers will find a number of things along this road, including Wolf Lodge Campground and RV Park, the Wolf Lodge Inn, and several residential homes. The area is pretty wooded and not significantly populated, but the folks that live there know each other. It's also not rare for someone to break down on the interstate and find themselves seeking help from one of the homes along Frontage Road. The weekend of May 14th, 2005 was quite strange for Robert Hollingsworth, a resident on Frontage Road. That weekend, he noticed a light-colored truck had been abandoned on his property, parked just near his barn. He called the vehicle into police and went on with his weekend. He needed some help with chores, so he asked one of his neighbor's sons, Slade Groney, to help mow the grass along his driveway. For the work, he intended to pay the boy $10. When Slade mowed the grass, Robert realized he didn't have correct change, so he promised to drop by the boy's home the following Monday to give him a $10 bill. This was a frequent occurrence and not outside of the norm. Slade often helped Robert on his property in exchange for a bit of cash, and sometimes Robert would drive by the house, honk his horn, and Slade would run out to get his money. On the evening of Monday, May 16th, Robert pulled up to Slade's home and honked the car horn as usual. He sat and waited, but Slade didn't come out. Eventually, Robert got out of the car and walked up to the porch, and that's when he realized something was very off. As his eyes panned the porch, he noticed dark red stains near the doorway. As he got closer, it became more and more obvious that the stains were blood, a significant amount of blood. There were no lights on in the house, which was unusual. And it was also unusual that all of the cars were parked outside in their designated spaces, but their doors were left open. Robert quickly returned to his own home and called police, the second time he would do so in days. Police rushed to Slade Groney's home to find that Robert had been correct. There was blood along the doorway and down the steps of the porch. They knocked on the door, and when there wasn't a response, they yelled inside for someone to come to the door. Fearing for the safety of those that might be inside, police entered the home. Immediately, they knew something terrible had happened. Blood was on nearly every surface of the home, and 2 bodies were discovered just steps away from the doorway. The bodies of a teenage male and an adult female were found on the floor between the kitchen and the living room. Both had been bound with duct tape and zip ties and were laying face down in a pool of blood. Searching deeper into the home, they located a third victim, a man appearing to be in his late 30s, covered in blood and laying on the living room floor. He had also been bound with duct tape and zip ties. A further sweep of the house left police assured that they were the only 3 deceased victims, though the home was covered in blood smears, blood spatter, and bloody handprints. The identities of the victims were discovered by looking at the mail, which was found in the outside mailbox. Envelopes were addressed to Brenda Groney, 40 years old, and her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, 37 years old. This was also confirmed by the neighbor Robert, who was able to tell them that the boy was Brenda's 13-year-old son, Slade. The bodies were taken for autopsy, and detectives were surprised by the results. Those initially on the scene believed the victims may have been shot, as most assumed there was only one perpetrator. But the autopsies indicated that all 3 died due to bludgeoning to the head. The medical examiner believed that the body temperatures of the deceased indicated they had been killed late Sunday evening or the early morning of Monday the 16th. Both Brenda and Mark had small traces of marijuana and methamphetamine in their system. Investigators had to consider that perhaps their deaths were the result of the couple's drug use. Maybe they owed someone money and they were killed for it. Friends and family assured them that they were not heavy drug users, but that they had recently had a barbecue and possibly did drugs with friends. Now, they were assuring them that this wasn't a huge problem in their lives. They weren't regularly doing drugs, and so a drug-related murder was highly unlikely. The most concerning aspect of the case at this point in time was that the neighbor Robert let police know that the 3 bodies they discovered were not the only occupants of the home. Brenda had 2 young children, 9-year-old Dylan and 8-year-old Shasta Groney. A search for the children immediately ensued. Their home was in a small clearing, and around them were a bunch of evergreen trees and a lot of brush. Search and rescue teams took to the wooded area around the home and along the lake. While some folks searched on foot, others were on horses or on four-wheelers. Dogs trained for searching for missing people, as well as dogs trained to find corpses, were brought in. The FBI joined the efforts and began circulating photos of the children to all residents. An Amber Alert was dispatched, and sadly, similar to my episode, Too Many Missed Opportunities, it became apparent that the system wasn't perfect. There was a delay in getting Dylan and Shasta's Amber Alert live. The information on the children was gathered on the evening of May 16th. However, that information wasn't immediately dispatched, as it wasn't until the morning of the 17th that authorities were certain the children were missing. The Amber Alert was dispatched at 4:30 a.m. However, it wasn't immediately acted on because of protocol. If you recall from that previous episode where I talked about the issues with Amber Alert, only certain people could approve them, and there has to be specific criteria met in order for that information to go live on the major highway electronic reader boards. The criteria that has to be met to issue an Amber Alert, according to the government website, is as follows. There is a reasonable belief by law enforcement that an abduction occurred. The law enforcement agency believes that the child is in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death. There's enough descriptive information about the victim and the abduction for law enforcement to issue an Amber Alert. The abduction is of a child aged 17 years or younger. The child's name and other critical data elements, including the child abduction flag, have been entered into the National Crime Information Center system. The information on the Groney children was eventually in the right hands by 6:30 a.m., but they questioned whether it was meeting the criteria of an Amber Alert, specifically the point about having enough descriptive information about the abduction. Because at the time, they were kind of questioning, are they just missing? Did they run away?
Did someone take them as part of this murder?
Exactly. Yeah. So finally, by 8 a.m. May 17th, they were issuing that Amber Alert. But that means that if someone took the children, they had likely done so well over 24 hours ago. And as we know, that's critical. Finally, information on the children was released to the public. They had no information on a potential perpetrator or a vehicle, but they were able to release the children's images and descriptions. 9-year-old Dylan Groney was described as 4 feet tall, 60 pounds, with blue eyes and blonde hair styled in a crew cut. 8-year-old Shasta Groney was described as 3 feet 10 inches tall, 40 pounds, with hazel eyes and long brown hair. Criminal profilers from the FBI were brought in to help put together an idea of who may have kidnapped the kids and committed these murders, because with each passing hour, it seemed more and more likely that these children were taken. Within days, hundreds of calls were made to the tip line. Before long, a reward was announced. The FBI was offering $100,000 for anyone who could help locate the children. The number of people working on the case grew to over 100. And while there were tons of tips, police really had very few leads to start with. One lead was the vehicle that Robert Hollingsworth found on his land and reported to police. As they searched Mark McKenzie and Brenda Groney's land, they discovered a wooden shed and several vehicles, and they began searching for clues among them that could possibly provide a lead. And that's when they remembered the call made by Robert earlier that weekend. Robert's property sat adjacent to the Groney property, and they still weren't sure who the vehicle belonged to. The vehicle in question was a silver 1988 Ford pickup with Idaho license plates. They looked the vehicle up, and it was registered to Daniel and Lisa Miller, and it was stolen. No one knew who these people were, and according to Robert, the vehicle had just shown up on his property sometime that weekend, and he discovered it around 6:30 a.m. Monday. Inside the vehicle, investigators found a ball of used duct tape covered in debris and a new roll of unused duct tape. The new theory was that an unknown perpetrator drove into the area in the truck he had stolen, likely in the cloak of darkness, and abandoned the truck and left in another vehicle with the children, likely swapping license plates. The neighbors described how when the weather was nice, they would often see the Groene children playing in their swimsuits out in their yard. The new theory was that an unknown perpetrator drove into the area in a truck that he had stolen, likely under the cloak of darkness, and abandoned the truck and left in another vehicle with the children, likely swapping license plates. The neighbors described how when the weather was nice, they would often see the Groene children playing in their swimsuits out in the yard. Before, they thought murder might have been the motivation, but was it the kids? Had someone been driving by on the highway and seen the children and come back for them? Did he watch them and plot what he was going to do? The tape and zip ties indicated planning. Another potential lead was Dylan and Shasta's biological father. Dylan and Shasta resided with their mother, her fiancé Mark, and their older brother Slade. Their mother was previously married to their biological father, 48-year-old Steve Groene, a blues musician. The pair married in Big Bear Lake, California in 1986. Together, they had 5 children: Vance, Jesse, Slade, Dylan, and Shasta. The couple divorced in 2001, and the children were split amongst 2 households. Vance and Jesse, who were now adults, chose to live with their father, while the youngest 3 children resided with their mother. Their father, Steve, had a set visitation schedule. Brenda supported herself with a maid service that she owned and operated. She cleaned homes in the area on a part-time basis. She began dating Mark McKenzie, who was a supervisor at a stainless steel manufacturer in Spokane. Brenda and her youngest children moved in with Mark, and before long, the pair became engaged. Mark was known to be an incredibly hard worker and was the primary breadwinner for the household. When the children were discovered missing, police quickly tracked down Steve to see if he had them. He didn't. While he held steadfast hope that his children would be found, he was a desperate father seeking help. A few days after the kids went missing, he took to national television to make an emotional appearance, begging for the return of his children. This soon led to increases in reward money being added and more requests for TV appearances. America's Most Wanted aired a segment on the investigation of the Groene-McKenzie murders and the kidnapping of the Groene children. This episode resulted in 19 additional tips being called in, none of which led anywhere. Geraldo Rivera then clutched onto the case and aired a segment on his show At Large. The episode was broadcast live, and they invited Steve Groene to be part of it. In the show, they confronted him and said he wasn't being truthful, that he had taken a polygraph with the FBI and the examiner had doubts about him. He accused him of knowing something about where his children were. This ended up surfacing information that Steve and Brenda, the children's mother, had recently gotten into a disagreement. Steve had wanted to take the kids for a few days outside of his normal visitation schedule because he was going on a 2-week vacation. Brenda declined the request and the pair bickered. Rivera dug into Steve's whereabouts, claiming that Steve never came home on Sunday, May 15th, and was away during the time frame of the killings, making him a suspect. He also spoke about Steve's prior issues with drugs. Steve never hid any of this information from investigators, and as much as Rivera made him look like a suspect and how the publicity had some of the public turning on him, detectives confirmed that there was no evidence that Steve Groene had anything to do with what happened to his family. Steve stated he was willing to take another polygraph as long as other people, who he would name, would also get one.
Oh.
There was at least 15 people on that list. Steve believed someone his children knew must have taken them. Shortly after all of this publicity, Steve added his $25,000 motorcycle into the reward that someone would get if they could locate his children. That may sound weird, but in the area, there are a lot of like motorcycle gangs.
Yeah, and if that's what you have for collateral and that's all you can offer, but that's still a reward in people's eyes,
Well,
why
and they're
not?
popular in the area, and those are the people that probably would see something and might know something.
And it also tells me how serious he
Mhm.
is at least presenting himself to be, because that's a very personal item. Not a lot of people would give away like a mode of transportation.
He was willing to give up all money he had,
Right.
his motorcycle, local sheriffs got money, FBI got money. The pot was getting really, really large. The Sunday prior to the discovery of the bodies of Mark McKenzie, Brenda Groney, and Slade Groney, they had a barbecue at their home. This proved to be tricky for police. On one hand, they had a group of people that they could focus on and begin narrowing down potential suspects. On the other hand, the home was littered with fresh fingerprints and DNA. But they had to follow any potential lead.
Especially since the dad is saying it could be someone that knew them.
Exactly.
And so they're all, that's tricky.
Eventually, a new lead emerged, a family friend, 33-year-old Robert Roy Lutner. Now, to be clear, Lutner was not a suspect, but a person of interest. Police just wanted to talk to him. This guy was known around town as Concrete Bob, a nickname that was developed due to him working in the concrete and construction industry.
Wow. Clever.
His name came up because he was present at the barbecue, and that Friday before the barbecue, he had visited the family in their home. It was apparently well known that he owed them $2,000. According to one of Brenda's sons, Jesse, Concrete Bob, his mom, and Mark had nothing negative between them. Bob wasn't even being pressured to pay back that money yet. However, Bob had a bit of a questionable background, so much so that police thought they had to take a look at him. In 1992, Bob had been arrested for drug possession. In 2004, he was arrested for domestic battery due to getting in a fight with his girlfriend outside of a bar. He had multiple convictions for fraud due to faking unemployment, and he was on probation at the time of the murders. As soon as he caught wind of police wanting to talk to him, he turned himself into the sheriff's department. He was interviewed for many hours and took a polygraph, which he passed, and was eventually dismissed as a person of interest. But that put the investigation back at the very beginning. In the 2 weeks following the discovery of the Groney family tragedy, dozens more investigators joined the efforts. More money was added to the reward, and over 900 tips were submitted before the end of May. 2 more weeks later, and over 700 interviews had been conducted, and 1,700 tips had been called in. Unfortunately, while they believed their case was far from cold, the leads just weren't going anywhere. With each week that went by, the chance of finding the Groney children grew slimmer. By early July, Shasta and Dylan had been missing an agonizing 6 weeks. Statistics show that the first few hours after a child goes missing are incredibly important, because after that, the likelihood that they'll be found alive decreases every day. While their father kept a daily hope to be reunited with his children, police were prepared for the case to shift to a strictly homicide investigation. And that's when something amazing happened. On July 2nd, 2005, in the very early morning hours, a man and a young girl got out of a red Jeep Cherokee in the Coeur d'Alene Denny's parking lot. The pair began to walk towards the building. Just outside of the Denny's were 2 young men, Nick Chapman and Chris Donlin, who were sharing a cigarette. That's when Nick looked up and recognized the girl walking into the building. When they locked eyes, he said he just had a feeling that she was Shasta Groney. He quickly texted his girlfriend, Tessa, who was inside the restaurant, to let her know what he had just seen. And soon, throughout the restaurant, others began to recognize her too. One of the Denny's waitresses, Amber Dean Peace, had just come back from a mid-shift break. She had a new table with a man and a little girl. She greeted them and right away felt like something was off. She noticed that the child was very dirty and appeared to have not bathed in a very long time. Each time she talked to the girl refused to speak to her or even look at her, and the man wouldn't look up from looking at the little girl. That's when she started looking more closely at the pair and realized she recognized the girl. It was Shasta Groney. Amber mentioned it to her manager that the little girl looked remarkably like Shasta. The manager, Linda Barger, called police while Amber worked to act as normal as possible and attentive to the man's table, as well as attempting to keep them there as long as possible so that police could arrive. At 1:51 a.m., the first of 2 911 calls were made from the Denny's. Here's part of the transcript from that call. Caller. Yeah, hi. This is Linda, the manager at Denny's. I've got a little girl here with a tall gentleman, and she looks so much like Shasta. Dispatcher. Okay, are they still in the building? Linda. Yeah, they're at table 20. Dispatcher. Can you describe the male to me? Linda. He's probably, how tall is he? I'd say 6'3", really slim. Dispatcher. Dark hair? Linda. Curly, with a hat on. We're not sure, she looks so much like her. I don't know. Dispatcher. All right, we'll have someone head that way. If they leave, could you call us right back? Linda. Sure. Dispatcher. All right, thank you. The call ends. A few minutes later, at 1:55 a.m., a second call to 911 is made. Dispatcher. Central Dispatch, this is Jenna. Caller. Yeah, Jenna, I wanted to tell you, I'm sitting here at the Denny's, and there's a little girl that just walked in that looks exactly like that Shasta girl. Dispatcher. Okay, is she still inside? Caller. Yes, she is. She's with an older man. I don't know if you guys want to send a deputy down to look, to check through the windows or whatever. I don't know what you guys would want to do. It's just awfully weird to me. The girl looks exactly like the little girl in the Nicholsworth, almost exactly like her. And the height description, from what I could estimate, is about the same and everything. I just think it might be an idea to send somebody down to check it out. She looks really, really a lot like the female in that paper. I don't want to cause problems for Denny's or anything, but I heard one of the waitresses mention to her manager that they keep walking by the table checking her out. Dispatcher. Yeah, we already have a call from there as well. Caller. I don't want to cause any additional problems, but I figured it might be a good idea to send somebody down to check it out. I mentioned it to them about a half hour ago, and they haven't left. They're still eating. Don't quote me, but I believe they drove in. That's when I was outside smoking a cigarette. I believe they drove in some type of red vehicle with Missouri plates, I believe. Me and my friends seen them get out of the car, I think. Within 10 minutes of the first 911 call, a police cruiser with its lights off quietly pulled up outside the Denny's restaurant. When the man noticed this, he quickly exited his table and took the girl with him to the restroom. The pair returned to the table, and 2 police officers walked up and pulled the man aside. Onlookers said the look on the man's face could tell you that he knew he was caught. The waitress, Amber, stayed with Shasta while the police walked the man out of the building. She asked her what her name was, and eventually she said Shasta Groney through her tears. Incredibly, Shasta Groney was discovered alive, but there were so many questions. What had happened to her and her family? Who was Joseph Duncan, the man she was discovered with? And where was her brother, Dylan Groney? We'll cover all of that in next week's episode. Do you know this story?
No, not at all.
Really? I remember it when it was happening.
What year is it?
2005.
Oh,
it was a big deal.
I had also never heard of it.
Really?
But I have read a couple of those articles that you're talking
Yeah.
about. That Denny's saga is incredible.
Incredible. It was one of the most, I think it was one of those moments where people realized I can help a case.
Right. I
It's-
don't know how they controlled themselves.
Oh,
I
would
know.
be I'd be like, hi, I'm just going to stand here and talk to you for a while.
I
And
think they knew
I'm
how-
just going to take her with me to the bathroom. Goodbye.
I think they knew how critical it was going to be because it had been 6 weeks. That's
Right.
unheard of. It is very rare to
Yeah.
recover a child alive.
Yeah.
I'm sure, but they were all just reeling. Like, the electricity in your
Oh,
body.
yeah. And just making sure you have to keep an eye on this person.
Shasta was probably pretty much assumed dead at that point. Both of them, both of the kids,
Yeah,
right?
police at that point were assuming they were dead. Now, the family, of course, was holding out hope, as most families do.
Right.
And I think there may have been a couple of false sightings, which, fuels that hope.
Right.
But yeah, I think at that point, 6 weeks, people were assuming
That's
maybe they would
wild.
find their bodies, but they weren't sure. It
Wow.
is wild.
and just the mystery of what even happened at the house still.
Well, that's the mystery. Now they have a witness who saw what happened at the house and can help them understand who this man is. Because at this
Right.
point, we don't know who he is.
And it's not like it was for ransom if people are
Right.
murdered. So,
And why would they return to Coeur d'Alene?
yeah, why are you still in the area 6 weeks later?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, and I'm
Hmm.
excited to
Interesting.
cover it next
interesting.
week.
Well, I look forward to all of those answers.
I love those 2 dudes outside smoking who see them and their
Yes.
reaction. I think there's a quote from one of them that was like, "There's nothing on earth that's going to allow him to leave the Denny's."
Oh, no.
Hell yeah.
I
Or
think they
something
were,
like that.
they were prepared to throw
Mhm.
down.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I bet you everyone was
They gave
done.
me biker vibes a little bit.
I
Oh,
think I know.
yeah.
I want to see. I think I'll look for a
Yeah,
picture.
that'd be
from
cool.
Smoking at a Denny's.
At
yeah,
2
get on
a.m.?
the road. Yeah.
2 a.m. Their girlfriends inside chit-chatting.
Oh.
Yeah.
But I just imagine everyone in the restaurant was probably done eating, but were
Uh-huh.
aware of
watching
what was
the
going
door,
on.
watching the
Mhm.
car. Like, okay, I'll make a run for it this way if this happens. Oh, yeah. Oh, that'd be thrilling.
Yes.
Oh, it'd be like, oh, it's happening, bitch. You don't even know, bitch. And it's coming your way, bitch. Oh, my God.
And take justice into his own hands. Into his own hands. Vazquez. Vazquez. Hold on. Stop. I love your gasps. They're
What a
always so
mystery.
perfect. They're perfectly timed. ISIS had been arrested.
Wow.
Oh, that was a good one.
That's classic
was a good
sounding.
bloopy bloop.
ISIS Arrestus.
I need a moment. Upon release, he registered as a legal. What come? What? Come?
Yes.
What? Come? What come? Owned the little house where his and Victor thing in the house that he was. Hold on. He was
Quiet. Secret. It's time to go to bed.
doing his best despite a life of oh my Jesus Christ. Open up to them about. Oh my boy. My boy. He had posted a
When is this?
early 2000s.
Oh, okay. So AOL was
A little out of
A
date.
little out of date then. Okay.
But maybe he had a lot of writings and he wanted to keep them.
You got it, and you got that handle, whatever your original handle
Oh,
is.
yeah.
What was yours?
Mine was Antigone 91.
I
don't know why. I read Antigone and it spoke to me. I don't know where the 91 came from.
How old were you in 91? 10?
What's Antigone?
9. It's
Hmm.
a character in Greek mythology.
Really? What did she do? Eat someone's children or something? Have Zeus do something bad?
I can't quite remember.
Well, all right, I'll look it up.
I'm sure there was somebody killed someone. There was some incest and somebody maybe accidentally killed someone, I think. I don't know why I don't remember. We made a
Aha.
video project out of it and I was the lead actress. So I should go back and look for that.
Please.
Oh no, she's the daughter of Oedipus.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's it.
Interesting.
39 miles east of Spokane, Washington, putting it just.
Spokane.
What did I say?
Spoken.
Did I really?
Yeah. You put
That's
a little
so
country
funny.
flair on it.
Spoken.
Spoken, Washington.
All right, let's just start from the very beginning. Robert pulled up to Slade's home and honked the car as normal. Nope. Steve Groney, a blues musician.
A blues musician.
Jesus. Chose. Fuck. Chose. Brenda? What's with me? So those cowboy boots, they infected me. Geraldo, is that his name? Geraldo, thank you. The episode was broadcasted live, and they invited Steve Groney to be
Broadcast. Sorry.
broadcast. You don't need to scream. Broadcast. Oh.
That was loud.
That's what it sounded like.
Broadcast. Sorry.
Broadcast.
That was loud.
That's what it sounded like.
Murder in the Rain is a Cascade Media production, written, hosted, and edited by Josh McCullough, Emily Rowney, and Alicia Holland. Feel free to email us at murderintherain@gmail.com or through our website, murderintherain.com. For as little as $1 a month, you can subscribe on Patreon to get exclusive access to ad-free and older episodes. For only $5, you can access Patreon-exclusive episodes and content. For more of us, be sure to follow on all the socials, listen to Josh and Alicia on their other show, Always Be My Sisters, and follow Emily on TikTok at @M_murderintherain. And suck my balls.